Hello, I'm Nancy Rubin Stewart, Executive Director of the Cape Cod Writers Center, and I'm delighted to be here for Books in the World with Julieta Almeida Rodrigues. Julieta is a former professor at Georgetown University and Lisbon and many other places I should mention. She's also the author of 4 novels, and this is her 4th, but this is a historical novel. It's her debut. It's called Eleonora and Joseph, and it's a fascinating tale. This takes place in 1799 to 1814. It's still in 1799, still the height of the revolutionary fervor that had spilled over from the French Revolution, anti-monarchy, and it's about a young woman who is a brilliant an erudite intellectual who embraces the principles of the revolution and liberty, equality, brotherhood, sisterhood, justice for all, and her former lover, Joseph. And Joseph they're both real characters. And I'll just say that Julieta has woven the most fascinating story. There's a 3rd character in this book, no other than Thomas Jefferson, and a great deal of this is based on fact, but like many historical novels, of course, she's had to fill in and create some of the questions that are left unanswered. So I'd like to welcome Julieta, and I want to ask you, first of all, Julieta, how did you become interested in these characters and decide to write about them?
Nancy, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, let's start with Eleonora. I was walking in the streets of Naples once, and I see a school, and the school has a name, and there is a plaque, and the name is Eleonora Fonseca Pimentel. And this is a Portuguese name. It's not an Italian name. And I was very confused. And then I did research on Eleonora and found out that she was a poet and a librarian to the Queen of Naples in the late 18th century. I had heard a lot about Joseph Correia da Serra, who is a well-known botanist and diplomat in Portugal, who happened to be with his family also in Naples at the same time that Eleonora is growing.
Did I read somewhere that Joseph also, there was at one point a commemorative stamp about him in Portugal? I believe so.
Yes,
Okay.
Because he was a priest, but above all, he loved botany. He was a very well-known botanist who throughout his career met everyone who is important in the field of botany in the 18th century.
In botany, okay.
And this is the interest that Thomas Jefferson has in Joseph. Thomas Jefferson in retirement is in Monticello, and when Correia, let's call him Correia or Joseph to simplify, when he is in working at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, he visits very often Thomas Jefferson in Monticello.
Okay, because Thomas Jefferson was involved with the American Philosophical Society, and he was interested in botany and horticulture. That was one of Jefferson's passions too, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And this is the main interest that Jefferson has in Joseph. He would like him to be the first professor of botany at the University of Virginia. And so this is a friendship that is based very much on the love that Joseph had for botany and the interest that Thomas Jefferson had that he become the first professor of the University of Virginia once the university is established. This is what Jefferson considers one of the major accomplishments of his life. In his tombstone, he did not want it to be mentioned that he was president of the United States. He wanted to be mentioned he was the father of the University of Virginia. So
that's his passion, is to be known as the founder of the University of Virginia. Okay.
Yes.
Rather than as president of the United States. So that's Thomas Jefferson. Okay. And his passion for botany. Okay, and that brings him to Joseph. Okay.
And Joseph arrives in America with letters of introduction from everyone who is famous in Europe, not only in the field of botany, but politicians like Lafayette. And so he arrives in America, and Thomas Jefferson is interested in meeting him. Joseph writes him a letter and says, I would love to come and visit you. Then it takes many months for Joseph to make the trip. But when the two men met, they find that they have a lot of common interests. And Jefferson is a fascinating personality because he loved to have guests in Monticello, but guests who could enliven his spirit during retirement. And this is what Joseph does for him. So they become very good friends for many years during all the time that Joseph remains in America.
And while Joseph is visiting Thomas Jefferson, he comes upon something that Jefferson had. A book Jefferson doesn't read Portuguese. So what is in this book, or diary, or whatever it is, notebook, I guess?
So this is an actual fact that Jefferson did not invite everybody to his private quarters because he has, I have been to Monticello several times, and he has his room, and he has a library next to his room, and the shelves were filled with books, and Jefferson collected many books on the French Revolution. And in the story, I make Jefferson tell Joseph, I have a very interesting book here that is handwritten, and it's handwritten in Portuguese. I can't read Portuguese. It is on my shelf on Revolution. Can you tell me what this is? And Joseph goes and looks at the book, and he realizes that this is a memoir written by Eleonora while she's still in Naples, waiting to probably be sentenced because of her views on the French Revolution.
So it's a book written by his former girlfriend, Eleonora, who's actually in jail, or in the middle of a trial in jail. I know it's a convent, but it's 3 judges. I remember that. And this is 15 years later. I know that Joseph is looking at this book. He must be horrified because Eleanor is going to be put to death, probably. So what happens? Well, you're not going to tell us at all, but tell us what happens a little bit.
He starts reading the book. He looks at the book and he sees the signature, and he's horrified because he says, my dear friend, my dear sir, you have this book here that is a memoir of this woman, and I happen to date her in Naples in my youth. And he's so mortified by this that he asks Thomas Jefferson to retire to his room, and he reads the diary during that night and the following day, and he sees that he's contrasting basically the life of a revolutionary with his own life. She's a revolutionary woman who becomes interested in the ideals of the French Revolution, and he looks back at his life and says, well, I dated this woman whom I ended up not marrying, and who is the better of the two of us?
Oh dear. Why didn't he marry her if he loved her and she loved him?
Well, there was a big problem, which was that Joseph's mother dies. And when the mother dies, the father, who was a medical doctor in Portugal and becomes a merchant in Naples, collapses. He collapses psychologically. A friend tries to help him, a friend affiliated with the royal family in Portugal, who tells Joseph, listen, if you become a priest, I can help you because I control all these monies from various branches of the church. And so the path for you in order to help your family and yourself is to become a priest. And if you come back to Portugal, once you are a priest, you have your financial problems solved as much as the ones of your family. And
So
Joseph,
he gives up Eleanor to become a priest so he can have money, so he can help his family, and later be financially comfortable when he can go back to Portugal.
yes,
He gives up Eleanor. It
he
must have been a terrible thing for her and him.
Yes. Yeah, in retrospective, I think it was worse for her than for him because he's a cosmopolitan. He's a man of the world. Jefferson invites him and he's completely at ease and he is enchanted by being in Monticello in this plantation and he loves the conversation with Jefferson. So he is a cosmopolitan. He's a man who is used to being in the world. Eleonora, on the other hand, remains in Naples. She is distraught by not marrying this man that she loves. The family wants her to marry a cousin, and she doesn't marry him, but ends up marrying a member of the lower nobility in Naples who mistreats her.
So she eventually has to marry, I guess, and she marries this other person, but he's abusive.
He's very abusive in the way many Southern European men were at that time. And at the same time, she and her friends, who are all intellectuals in Naples, are hearing about what is going on in France and what is going on in terms of the ideals of the French Revolution, and they want to adhere. They say the Kingdom of Naples has no possibility of reform. There is no way we can improve the conditions of the poor here. So what we need is a change of regime.
So we want to get rid of the monarchy just like they did in France and help the poorer people and enable them to live better. So she's sort of she's a leader and she's a radical, I guess, in terms of the monarchy.
Absolutely.
Okay.
She is a poet. She is a librarian to the Queen of Naples.
Uh-huh. How can she be so liberal if she's the librarian to the Queen of Naples? And here she wants to get rid of the monarchy.
Because she has access to books. She has access to information.
Yes.
And, the librarians in these courts were very fortunate because they had access to books that were not printed in their own city, but were coming from abroad.
So she understands what's going on in the rest of at least Europe at that time. So she becomes very sophisticated politically then. Yes?
Absolutely. Or, yes, she becomes very sophisticated. She is in the court of Naples, and she has all these friends who are intellectuals who say with her, there is nothing that we can do to improve the lot of the commoner in this kingdom. And so the solution is to do what the French did, abolish the monarchy and create a republic.
Does that happen? Does it happen? Do they get rid of the monarchy?
Yes, they do.
Ah,
yes, they do.
She's a leader. She's one of the people who writes a lot in this very radical newspaper to stir up people. And
yes. You see, all of these intellectuals in Southern Europe, and particularly in the Kingdom of Naples, were reading the Encyclopedia, Diderot, Voltaire, the Monitors, which were the liberal papers in France at the time, and they know that France, after proclaiming the Republic, France has an expansionist view of the world, and they know that the French troops are coming down, and they open the gates of the city of Naples to the French army.
Ah, the French army comes in. This is the liberated French army. This is obviously well after the king and so on are dead, executed. So this is the liberation army, if you will, get rid of the monarchy. Okay.
Yeah. And they arrive in Naples. Can you imagine? They come from France, the southern of France, and suddenly they are in the southern tip of what is now the Italian peninsula. They come in and they liberate the Kingdom of Naples and they institute a republic. And the republic lasts only for 5 months. And they were trying to execute the ideals of the French Revolution in Naples, but they had a huge problem. The populace is not with them. Only the intellectuals want the French there.
So the commoners don't, they want the monarchy back. They don't understand?
They don't understand that their life can be ameliorated. And this is a fascinating fact, because they believe in the magic of the kingdom.
They're enamored with the monarchy and the whole mystique of the monarchy and the grandeur. Okay, I get it. Okay.
They want the monarchy back. So the king and queen of Naples leave by boat, go to Sicily when the French army enters, and there is bloodshed. And the intellectuals, like Eleonora, control what is called the Republic of Naples during 5 months.
Only for 5 months. Okay.
Only 5 months.
And then what?
And
so the king and queen come back?
The king and the queen come back, helped by whom? By Lord Nelson. Lord
Nelson.
By Lord Nelson.
That's a part of the history I never heard of in knowing English history. Wow. Okay.
It's fascinating because Ferdinando and Carolina, the king and the queen of Naples, want to come back to the kingdom, and they ask the help of the British. And the British want to control the Mediterranean, and so they support Ferdinando and Carolina.
Well, where does that leave Eleonora? So now she's in hot water because she's the other side.
That leaves Eleonora in very hot water, not only her, but her entourage of friends, but she's the only woman. She is the only woman who adheres to the ideals of the French Revolution in Naples. And part of my explanation and part of what we know, the reason why she does that is because she's basically a very unhappy woman. And so at one point, she had a very unhappy marriage, and at one point she decides, I have nothing to lose. I really have nothing to lose. And she's arrested with the others when the king and the queen return. And she writes this diary while she is in jail. And she doesn't know what's going to happen to her, but she fears that once she cannot go into exile, because she was the editor-in-chief of a revolutionary newspaper in Naples, she's very afraid of what's going to happen to her. And so she has the help of a nun in the prison, and the nun gives her the parchment and gives her the ink, and he gives her the pen, which was a plume, and say, do with this what you want, because the nun fears that she might die.
And she's afraid she might die, so she now has the notebook or the parchment notebook, whatever it is, and she writes what's happening to her because she's now facing a trial. That is the same book that Joseph is given by Jefferson.
Yes, because
15 years later.
Yes, because this is fascinating. So many of these revolutionaries in Naples, not the top revolutionaries, but many of these revolutionaries in Naples were allowed to leave. And they went where to? They went to France. And so they carry with them very few things, but the nun finds Eleonora's memoir and gives it to her niece, who is going to join another member of the family who is in exile in France. And this is totally plausible. that Eleonora writes this memoir in Italy, in the Kingdom of Naples, that the memoir gets to France, and that someone sells it to make some money, because these revolutionaries were not well received once they were back in France. And Thomas Jefferson bought books on the French Revolution. And after he was back in Monticello, many French librarians continue sending him materials about the French Revolution. And so this is totally plausible. And so my plot is that in these books that are sent to Jefferson goes somehow Eleonora's diary that Joseph finds in Jefferson's library in Monticello.
We won't tell you what happens to Eleonora, but Joseph must have been astounded to find this diary of his former girlfriend, his former sweetheart, he never could marry. And Jefferson, meanwhile, has opened his arms to Joseph because he wants him to be a professor of botany at his new, still not founded, but in process, University of Virginia. Wow. So what is Jefferson like? What do you show us? I know, by the way, I know you've been to Monticello, and I believe you told me there's a whole room that is somehow devoted to Joseph, or at least to botany and Joseph as a botanist.
The room is it's a bedroom,
yes,
which is opposite the room where Jefferson stayed in Monticello. There were only two people who had a permanent room in Monticello. One was Madison, who was also president of the United States, and he lived close by, and he came and visited Jefferson often. And the other one is Joseph Correia de Serra. And the room is exactly as the room when he stayed there. So Jefferson had this room ready for Joseph Correia every time he wanted to come and visit. And these visits, it's very interesting, these visits were extended visits because you travel far away, and so you don't come for a day or two, you stay for several weeks. And the room is still there, and it's a room, with a bedroom and a little desk, and it's really wonderful. It's nice and cozy. It's nice and cozy. And Joseph stayed there several times during the years in which Jefferson was retired.
Did Joseph become a professor of botany, the first professor of botany at the University of Virginia?
Unfortunately not. This is a fascinating question. Unfortunately not. Fascinating question, because Joseph is, at the later part of his stay in America, he becomes the first ambassador from the Kingdom of Portugal and Brazil to the United States.
Okay.
And Jefferson is extremely generous because Jefferson loves Joseph, knows how knowledgeable he is, wants to give him the position, but once he becomes an ambassador, he says, well, this is what you always wanted. And there you are, my friend, you are now an ambassador, and congratulations. And I was doing some research on this. Jefferson gave the job to Dr. Thomas Cooper, and this was in 1719. But somehow Cooper never starts the position. And the first one who starts the position and heads the chair of botany, it's someone called John Patton Hammond.
So a man named Hammond, John Hammond, becomes the first professor of botany, and Joseph, meanwhile, is an ambassador. Hey, was there anything that Joseph could have done to save Eleonora? Did he know she was imprisoned?
Well,
at the time, going back to 1799, now that he's seen this diary, was there anything he could have done to save her?
I think he could have, had he wanted. I think he could, but communications were very even if communications were very difficult during the 18th century, it's not like now that we have a cell phone on our desk at all times. Joseph was an intellectual. There was news in London, where he was at that time, of what was happening with the French Revolution and French expansionism towards the southern part of Italy. And so it's impossible that Joseph did not know, but he wasn't interested. He wasn't interested. He could have called his friend Joseph Banks, and Joseph Banks was very good friends with the ambassador, Lord Hamilton, but nothing is done, and therefore Eleonora has a bad ending.
So this is an interesting examination of two very brave and ambitious lovers, and politics gets in the way of their union. And the aftermath is, well, tragic but gripping, because Julieta's book starts out in a very dramatic fashion. I remember reading the first chapter some couple of years back and pulled in by her situation. And while it's very balanced between Julieta's made a balance between Jefferson, Eleonora, and Joseph. You know, it's really a woman's story. It's a commentary on brave women historically. At least that's my perspective on it. So what, in just the last minute or two we have, what was your intent for the book? What did you want readers to come away with? Again, we only have a minute or two left. Actually, we have just a few minutes, a minute. So
I wanted to show what makes a woman in the 18th century become a revolutionary.
Okay.
And possibly die for her ideals. And I wanted to show how a cosmopolitan like Joseph, as time goes on, becomes more and more conservative, because he decides, I'm going to take advantage of what the world has to offer.
Okay, fantastic. So we've been talking with Julieta Almeida Rodrigues, and this is her book, Joseph and Eleonora, and we hope you get a chance to read it. Thank you very much, Julieta.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Nancy. I enjoyed this very much. Thank you.